Good afternoon, everybody. It's indeed an honor to actually be a moderator on the panel, which is such decorated. And probably I'm the only one who doesn't have any experience in the regulatory affairs, so to say. So that's why I prefer to be the moderator rather than one of the speakers. We have Mr. Manoj Kumar Singh, who currently is the Chief of Regulatory Affairs and Sustainability at Indus Tower Limited. We have Mr. Mehta, who is the CEO of Reliance Energy. Mr. Oberoi, Rajiv Oberoi, he is Group General Counsel and Group Head Legal and Compliance, IDFC. You know, he's a doctorate. Dr. Rajiv Oberoi heads the Legal and Compliance team at IDFC.
Good afternoon. There's a very subtle statement here, changing the business legal landscape for Made in India. The very important element of changing the executive arm of the government or executive arm of the nation is missing in that. It either presupposes that what has been stated so far of self-regulation, then automation, or sort of giving authority to individuals to do their own regulation and perform seems to have been presupposed that it will be implemented and it will be in it. Otherwise, the fundamental change in the executive arm of the nation also requires to be a participant in this. There are some indications that needs to be much more, and why I am saying all this will get reflected in the presentation which I am going to give you. Distribution business is a very regulated business. It touches everybody 24/7. This is one of the service which is available to the customer or the user without interruption of even a minute or without an expected interruption even for a minute. We might be sleeping, but the fridge would be on, the air conditioning would be on, the fans would be on. So there's never a time when a distribution licensee or a distribution service provider has a sleep that here is a time where I don't have to be worried about because my services are not being used. So that challenge, we are meant to be meeting that challenge, and we are happy to say we meet that challenge. Now I'll come to the presentation. This has been divided into, just to give you an overall perspective of what we are, then the importance of electricity, then legal framework, what has been in last 10 years and why it has happened, and then what are we talking about going forward. I'm going to be a little fast, not going into the details, but just to give an overall perspective of what I want to say. Next slide, please. No, you've jumped the slides. Slide number 3. Now go up. The one before that. Okay, this is just to give a reflection of what we are. We as a group serve 2/3 of Delhi and 2/3 of Bombay, and have a distribution license for that area, and we give service to all the consumers. Many of you would be our consumers with either Rajdhani or Yamuna as a company. In Mumbai also we serve the suburbs of Mumbai. Next slide, please. This is just a reflection of what we are in Mumbai, about 400 square kilometers, 2.9 million customers being served by us. Next slide, please. Now, yeah, that one with the graph. No. You're going too fast, man. Can you go back, please, on the graph, slide number 6. Can I control it from here otherwise? Slide number 6, please. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is just a reflection how electricity is important in the GDP growth of a nation. If 1% GDP growth, it's 0.8% energy growth which is required to meet that 1% growth of GDP. And that reflects the importance of electricity as a whole sector be it generation, be it transmission, be it distribution. Next slide, please. Yep. One after that. Next one. Yep. This just gives as to how this industry is regulated. On the left-hand side, if you see, it talks about the distribution company who is under the umbrella of Electricity Act, National Tariff Policy, then regulation through Central Electricity Regulatory Commission or the State Regulatory Commission. On the right hand reflects how the mechanism of law formation and implementation takes place. So having Electricity Act in place, policies in place, regulations in place, now what happens is that if it is a regulation which needs to be worked on, then the route is through the High Court. So if I have to challenge something on the regulation, I have to go to the High Court and the Supreme Court. But if it is relating to an order issued by a commission, then it goes to the appellate and then to Supreme Court. This is just to give a perspective before I come to the main thing. Next one, please. Now, this reflects in 2003, the Electricity Act was amended, and what was the driving force of the Electricity Act? If you see on the left-hand side, it reflects competition, encourage competition, give choice to the customer, accountability and transparency. So that's why all these regulators were formed. Unbundling of the industry was done into generation, transmission, and distribution so that each one acts independent of each other. Viability, appropriate tariff. If subsidy is to be given, the government should give subsidy ahead of asking the companies to give subsidy. That means the government was required to fund the subsidy in advance before the subsidy is to be given to the consumer. Access, everybody who wants electricity should get electricity on demand. Quality and affordability, resolution of grievances if the service is not there. So the transparency was expected out of that. And then the promotion of renewable energy. So these were the driving forces when the Electricity Act 2003 was legislated. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one. Now, this reflects one of the means of competition which was thought in Electricity Act was open. Now, the open access, as this chart reflects, till November 2014 has only been about 3,000 customers. Out of a whole large gamut of customers, large industries, large everybody, but the success has been only 2,600 or 3,000 customers having opted for open access. Why so? Go to the next slide, please. Now, this is a landed tariff if a customer wants to go into an open access. It could differ from category to category, but just to give an idea. And if you look at the cost or the tariff which the state utility or the utility comes to charges, it is about 1 to 1.5 rupee cheaper. The reason, one, there are historical power plants and therefore the cost of energy is low. In addition to that, there is an element of cross-subsidization which is a common factor. So the entire focus remains to the extent of cost of power differential between the utilities average pricing and the cost of power which the consumer would have to buy from an alternate source, in addition to managing its own requirement every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes planning. Next slide, please. Now, here is a reflection of what has happened contrary to what was expected in the Electricity Act. Electricity Act said tariff should be given, consumers should get the benefit. Now, here is a reflection that about 2,000 billion rupees are standing in the system which are unrecovered. That means the tariffs are not cost reflective. Now, what will happen to this 2,000 billion of rupees? Either they are funded by the government or they are being funded by the financial institutions. It has to be ultimately paid for. It has to be paid with carrying cost. So how does it make sense in carrying over a liability which gets paid along with that? So this is one of the major failures. The reasons are, yes, socio-political, economic societies, diversity, but that all has to be balanced if you want to have a business which survives, which if you want the consumers to have an advantage of what the reality is. Next slide, please. Now this reflects how the cost versus average tariff is, the gap is increasing over a period of time, and that's a reflection of 2,000 billion rupees being deficit. Now, if you go into the next slide. Now this reflects how the average cost is and how a large number of domestic concessions are available to the domestic consumers, which is to be paid by the high-end consumers, industries, commercial consumers, and the high-end users of the domestic. Now that is where this imbalance, if not corrected, would continue to cause a problem into the industry. Next slide, please. This is just a reflection, but I think it will be common for any arm of the legal process that the time taken in resolution or in giving the judgments is so large that it only hurts the system rather than helping the system, even though in the law it provides that it should be done within a certain period of time, but it does not happen, and that's one thing which needs to be attended or changed. Next slide, please. Now this reflects that the average implementation of the scoring which has been done of implementation of reform is 0.54. That's the kind of a reform which have happened in from 2003 to 2014, when the expectations were very high. Next slide, please. Next one. Various committees were formed, various recommendations were given, but hardly anything implemented or implemented in a very slow phase. And again, 2,000 billion rupees is an outcome of that. Next slide. I'm not going to go over this. If anybody is interested, the presentation could be made available. I'm just going to make the point and move forward because of the paucity of time. So there are 3 or 4 committees which were formed, recommendations were given, partially implemented or hardly implemented, and that's where we are. Next slide, please. Next one. Now go to the next section. Next. Now we're just going to talk of the future, which is being talked about. There's a focus, coal block auction, which everybody is reading about. There's a proposal to have Electricity Act amendment. There are changes. One of the major changes I'll just talk about a little more. And there's a focus on renewable energy. So these are the focus area which the government has given direction to the country to move forward towards. Next slide, please. Well, I'll escape this. These are coal block auction. It is still in the process. There's a high expectation that the cost of power and the price of power will drop because the coal price should drop. But that is all still in the process. Let's wait and watch the implementation part of it. Next one, please. This is renewable energy focus. We are at about 12%. We want to go in a huge way. There are challenges of investment and there are challenges of managing the grid. Germany has a huge renewable energy, and it causes a host of issues with reference to managing the system, and I'm sure this will get addressed as we move forward. Now, next few slides reflect what the new amendment is being proposed, which is it has already been submitted to Lok Sabha. It is with the standing committee right now, and then of course it will get into Rajya Sabha and get it as an amendment to the Act. I'll just go on the last slide. I'll not go into each one. There are different proposals of change which are being talked about to bring more competition, to bring more refinement into the system and all that. But let's go to the last one major change, slide number 33, please. 33 slide. Yeah. This is a major change. Today, the distribution business is a combined responsibility of wire and retail, wire and content. The carrier and content as is commonly known. So if I am a distribution licensee, I am responsible to manage the wire network as well as manage the availability of power for the consumer. Now there's going to be a shift where the proposal is to separate these two activities, the wire and the content. So wire business will be handled by one utility and the content would be handled by multiple utilities. There will be one utility who would be responsible to serve the low-end consumers who would be regulated and whose tariff would be determined by the regulator. And then the rest of anybody can take a license, come as a supply licensee and create an environment of competition. So whosoever is competitive, a customer would have a choice to select out of those resources available as to who he wants to supply to get the power supplied through the wires of a common utility. So this is a huge change. There has been in US, it has been in UK, it's being implemented or thought to be implemented in India through these amendments. There will be challenges of implementation because there are contracts, how the contracts will be done, how the separation would be done. So those will be all procedural challenges and I'm sure these will be addressed by the executive of the government of India. Now this was just to give you a perspective that how, in spite of having the means where the law existed, everything was there, but the execution did not happen the way it should have happened, and which has caused a huge problem into the entire sector, and now that will again get to be corrected and then move forward. So this was most to give a perspective. I didn't want to get into the legalities because you all are experts in the legal rather than me or us. And therefore, I didn't want to get into specifics of the legal aspect. I wanted to give you the perspective of the industry and how it suffers if the legal formats available are not properly and timely implemented. Thank you very much.
Rather, ladies and gentlemen. So, very good topic which Aman has gave to me, that telecom is being perceived as an energy guzzler. So just to wash off this perception, so I would just give some attempts and the initiative with the industry has been taking and has taken to wash off this, and probably with some facts and data also. So before I go to that initiative, just to give in 2 slides the glimpse of the telecom. So telecom is actually growing with a CAGR of 14.5%. And by 2020, we are, as Minister said in the morning, that we are going to touch 1 billion customers. And telecom is contributing roughly 3% to the country's GDP. And if you look to the telecom tower industry from where I belong to, it is growing at a CAGR of 11%, and multiple overlays of technology, 3G, 4G, and many more to come in future. So coming to Aman's point that telecom sector is the energy guzzler. So our objective, the bigger objective, is reducing carbon footprint. And before I go to this, I represent Indus Tower, which is the largest telecom tower company. And we have a market share of more than 25%. 450,000 towers are across the country, and we own 114,000. So we as an industry leader has a first overall objective is reducing carbon footprint year on year. So which we will substantiate with certain facts and data. And what is our strategy in achieving this overall objective? First, we focus towards load. Of course, the load optimized is the first, as we always say that unit saved is twice generated. So that's the objective. And then we focus towards optimal storage with various technologies. And then we switch over to the source. And as Sir was saying, Mr. Mehta was saying that all towards renewable energy, this is our priority after optimizing the load and the storage. And as we all know that telecom tower industry is not a power industry, it is a telecom industry. So whatever we do So, and coming back to the perception again, guzzler. So the guzzler word was not came into the context of energy guzzler, rather it came into the context of diesel guzzler. And here I would like to bring into the fact that diesel is not used by choice. It is a compulsion. It is the costliest fuel available among all other possible fuels. And as we all know that we have a license condition of 99.95% of uptime. I do not find any other sector which have such a stringent uptime obligation from the license per se. To maintain that and to keep our customer satisfaction at the top, we are bound to use primary, secondary and tertiary backups to maintain that uptime. And this diesel, which is being said as a diesel guzzler, comes as a tertiary backup after the grid, then the storage, then the diesel power. And when we select any project, what is our deciding criteria is of course the scalable, because we know that telecom is penetrating so fast, so it has to be scalable up to the deepest part of the country, and the outcome must be predictable. We cannot innovate and research the technologies in our network because it is a live network. So the outcome has to be predictable, and we cannot de-risk. We cannot compromise on the network quality, and of course it has to be a sustainable solution. So whatever services we offer to you, it has to sustain for a longer time or forever. To get this and to get this perception off the mind of the general public, what we did at Indus, we actually drove a slogan called Sat Ashi and Sat DG. And as I spoke earlier that we started from load optimization, which is Sat Ashi, to moving towards the optimization the source of power, which is Sat DG. And very proudly, I could say that today, out of 1,14,000 sites which we operate across the country, we have 35,000 sites which do not use diesel. And how it happened? It has not happened by its own. It has actually requires a lot of infusion of technologies. When I say infusion of technologies, means replacement of gadgets which can sustain higher ambient temperatures, replacement of higher technologies, batteries which can store deficient power at a faster pace for a longer time, and also some low consuming BTS. So if, say example, earlier BTS were consuming 2.5 kilowatt, today our consumption equivalent to that is 1 kilowatt. So that has gone into humongous capex infusion into that in order to achieve 35,000, and growing to our target is set to achieve 50,000. Roughly 50% of my network should be diesel free. That's our target. So we are focusing toward that. And what has in turn the derived benefits? We have saved absolute diesel of 54 million liters, which has in turn saved 140 million kgs of CO2, which is equivalent to 3.5 million trees planted. So as I started my discussion that we are starting all boiling down to the carbon footprint reduction. And this is a fact which I want to highlight here, because as we all know, and every discussion comes in that telecom penetration is going fast and faster. So in spite that our business has grown by 60% when we started 4 years back, we have decreased our diesel consumption absolute by 35%. So that's the number here. And if you see this graph, at a time when we all know that the country is power deficit, which Aman was trying to highlight, there was a starting time when Indus was born 5 years back, when we were using 52% of diesel and 48%, which is dropped down to 48% now. And the earlier, which was 35%, was the grid power consumption, which we have maximized. And it is not all sole our contribution, only EB availability has also gone up, and credit goes to discoms and the power generators as well. So we have maximized the grid power utilization at our site from 35% to 65%. And when we say that, it is not that government is providing the power up to my doorstep. Again, it has gone into the lot of capital infusion, and there are cases when we are bringing the power even from several kilometers. And there are instances in which our getting the grid power cost at the telecom tower site is almost the 30% of the cost of the total built-up cost of the site. So that's the case. So just to give a ballpark number, one telecom tower costs 25 to 30 lakhs. There are instances in which we spend 5 to 10 lakhs to bring that grid power to our telecom tower site. So that's the compulsion in which we are operating our business. While we are doing so, this comes to my third leg of my starting point, that in spite we are doing all this, all our commitments, washing of the public perception. In between, there was a Green Telecom Directive. And then again, I must point that how the regulations are facilitating this business to grow and facilitating business to sustain. So just to give a snapshot, because the audience sitting here may not be very familiar with this whole directive, just one slider. So it has 4 legs. That directive says that the power generation at the telecom tower should be through renewable energy. And there are certain directives, and probably directive is so, you can say, pulpy in nature, that if we boil down to the real numbers, probably some of the audience sitting here or the panelists sitting here can understand that it interprets into an installation of roughly 3 gigawatts of renewable energy generation at the telecom towers. So probably whosoever, and that's the challenge of our regulation. We do not actually multiply the technical facts to it and bring out the regulation in place, and then it goes to the legislation. And then the legalities are there. And topping to it is the carbon footprint, then the green passport, and then the green carbon credit policy. All are the part of this policy. There are too many, you can say, complications and nitty-gritties to this directive. Because of paucity of time, I will not go into this. But of course, this regulation, because we are actually discussing the regulation part also, this all are the legs which is already presented to the Government of India through Department of Telecommunication for their corrections and re-notification. We have deployed solar across the country. Roughly 4.5 megawatts of solar power is installed across various towers, spreading across almost 1,000 locations. One important point which we really want to highlight here is our business is sharing. And through sharing, we actually intend to reduce the energy consumption per unit basis. And incidentally, what happens, and everything is going compact day by day, we are intending towards more compact telecom tower, more compact telecom gadgets, then we do not have a space to install solar at such a distributed locations. So there are various challenges which I will not go through one by one. So we actually did experimenting all possible and renewable technologies. Probably what Aman said, that I have not experimented geothermal. But to bring in the fact here is, and I was smiling when Aman was pointing out, I did experiment with the geothermal as well. And then I realized that geothermal cannot replace the air conditioner. Rather, we started a different initiative to completely remove the air conditioner from the site. So out of the various other technologies, we found that solar is little bit mature. But over and above, I'm going towards a conclusion towards Make in India, and which I presented to a Department of Telecommunication with their Japanese delegation as well. And this is not only important to telecom sector, but it is also important to all other sectors who are actually into the storage of the electricity. So if you look to the telecom per se, that roughly we have $12,000 million of battery consumption across the telecom sector. Out of that, $300 million is towards Indus. And topping to this 1,200, roughly $400 million the replacement capex for the batteries. So if I look that this is a 15 gigawatt hour of battery installed across the telecom network, because ultimately this is a power deficit country, which is set to increase to 22 gigawatts of hour. And if that is the size of the storage business in country, the technology which is called lithium ion need to be promoted. And we actually submitted this case, and which has gone to the PMO for the consideration as well, that today the lithium-ion battery is twice the cost of the lead acid. And we all know the challenges toward the environment of lead. So we actually has given a proposal that if the industry supports, to support this technology as a volume, the 15% cost reduction can come by the scale of economy of scale, and on this product there is a 27% to 28% duty imposition. And if it comes to the Make in India concept, this 27-28% is absorbed by the government. Let's facilitate and do not have this import duties because it will be Make in India. The left is 5%, and if the 5% is being substituted by lead-free incentive or anything, or even may not be, you can say, compensated, this technology comes at par to lead acid. And the moment lead acid is replaced with lithium ion, there will be a paradigm change. Probably our dependence upon the diesel will substantially go down, and we all know that diesel is our imported crude. So that's the model which we have submitted, and coming back to Aman's point is that what is our approach towards removing or washing of the perception of diesel guzzler. So last slide, what is our action points? As I said earlier that we have to reduce our consumption, then the efficient storage, and then we have to move towards whatever we can do in contributing by greener power generations. Thank you very much.
Actually, in the literal sense, I'm standing between all of you and lunch. And more so, I have to apologize, I'm not carrying any presentation. So I can assure you that I will not take more than 5 to 7 minutes, because ultimately any regulation which he makes or any law which is made is for the interest of the larger public. So in that context, after hearing the minister and the other people in the morning, it's very difficult to contribute anything more than that. But I have to dance for my dinner, so if I have been asked to make some contribution to the thought process of each one of you, I would like to put a few thoughts around the so-called PPP model, which is, taking the rounds by saying that it has failed. It's being said that it was never a good model for India. There are some groups which we feel that we need to modify it to make it more effective. Having said that, if you look at the whole discussion since this morning, starting from the minister who happens to be a lawyer, and most of the other people in some form or shape have the legal acumen or the training, and they have been talking about the laws and the regulations and the rules, and the last point which was made by Aman was that are these for the business or against the business? Now let me put a question to the people here who are generally lawyers, if I know. None of us will say we don't need laws. Is it right? We are not in Ram Raj, where you don't need the law and everyone is self-regulated. You need the law. Why you need the law? You need the law for the people. Well, we can put for the country, for the people, and for the businesses. And when a law is made, it has to be implemented. So it has to be put into a regulatory framework, or the rules are made. And those rules have to be implemented. And that implementation has got two things. One, letter, and all of us know the other thing is spirit. Letter is very easy to interpret and define. It is the spirit which is the challenge, which even Christ could not do it. And it was the Holy Ghost who decided what he had to do. But having said that, for that spirit and the interpretation of the spirit, you require somebody who can look at the spirit aspect and say, the letter may be saying this, but the spirit was this, and that is where the role of the regulator comes. Wherein he looks at the things and says, okay, this is what I feel, and it is certainly challengeable in the court of law. So I think that is what we have to understand, that the regulators have played the role. I do agree that we have multiple regulators, but the multiple regulators are required. Where we are not doing is that the regulators are not doing what they should be doing in an appropriate way. Now, that also is a question. Is the regulator a person who should be made a regulator because the state wanted him to be a regulator, or he'll be able to really dispense some kind of a justice or clarification to the others? Coming to the point, I think I'm aware of the time. Coming to the point about the PPP framework, I think the PPP framework has been, if not a game changer, it gave a different direction to the infrastructure development, because you had a state which had paucity of funds. It wanted to engage the private capital to come there, and then it was supposed to deliver it for the public, which is the public good. The point is, whether we really managed to do that or not is a question mark. But believe you me, no law is sacrosanct. Even Lord Macaulay did a great job. But all the laws have changed over a period of time. And we have to change the laws to meet the need. And that's why you have regulations, and that's why you have rules, which are much easier to change compared to an act. Because it is requirement of the people who are being governed by that act or by regulated by those regulations. The challenge has been that in the PPP, the framework which we have, the document which we have, has been made rigid. Even today, the PPP master agreement cannot be changed even a line without the approval of the empowered committee of ministers. So that makes it rigid. So you are trying to negotiate a malleable and a ductile environment with a rigid document. Obviously there will be resistance. So that's first part. The second part is that any document has to have, which is, equity, justice, fair practice, which I think was alluded by Mr. Kapoor, has to have the inbuilt mechanism for that. That's why you have a dispute resolution mechanism in these documents. But are they really effective? How many dispute resolutions or how many of the arbitrations have actually been resolved? And last but not the least, it stems out of the other area of the land. If you have not given me what I need to make a road, how can you expect me to deliver without getting that? And last but not the least, in the whole scheme of things, and I'm just giving you some thought process around this room, to think about these things, that all these things are made for the good of the people, for the benefit of the people. But it is few people or few vested interests or few aggrieved parties which lead to a situation where you find that things are not moving. When I say aggrieved party, it could be each one of us. When I say vested interest, it could be the state itself. But in a contractual obligation, there is nothing like state. It is between the two contracting parties, and they have to be at par. And that is where the regulatory framework comes, where you and the state go at par to them and say, I am aggrieved, please resolve my thing. And there is a all of us know that justice delayed is justice denied. And the fourth part is that. So if we are able to address these basic four things, I think it would be very helpful to see that the whole PPP framework or the infra, PPP is only a mode for reaching the destination of infrastructure. And I think that's what I would like to leave all of you with. And also, there was a talk about the single window, which I've been talking for ever since I have, become an adult. People are talking of single window. They're talking of multiple things. The minister told about 100 laws being repealed. Everything is fine. But the bottom line is ease of doing business. So all these things which I mentioned about the PPP project and beyond has to result in ease of doing business. And for that, you don't need laws. You just need to see where it is paining or where it is hurting. Thank you very much.